Bruchim haboim to our overview of Masechta Sukkah. Masechta Sukkah is closely organized according to the Sheva Mitzvahs Hanoikis B'Chag Sukkos, the 7 mitzvahs that comprise the Yom Tov of Sukkos. Mitzvahs Asiyas Sukkah, Mitzvahs Yeshivas Sukkah, Mitzvahs Arbo Haminim, Mitzvahs Arava B'Veis HaMikdash, Mitzvahs Nisach HaMayim B'Veis HaMikdash, Mitzvahs Karbonis B'Veis HaMikdash, and Simchas Beis HaShe'eva B'Veis HaMikdash. The Torah in Parshas Emor writes, "B'chamisha asar yoyim lachidush hashvi hazeh chag Sukkos shivas yomim laHashem. B'Sukkos teishu shivas yomim kol ha'ezach b'Yisrael yeshu b'Sukkos l'man yedu dereseichem ki b'Sukkos teshavtes b'nei Yisrael b'yitziosem me'eretz Mitzrayim ani Hashem lekeichem." Torah commands us to dwell in Sukkos, or booths, for 7 days, l'man yedu dereseichem, so that all future generations will know that the Bnei Yisrael lived in Sukkos while they wandered in the Midbar after Hashem took them out of Eretz Mitzrayim. The Gemara in Daf Yud presents a machlokes as to what exactly the mitzvah commemorates. The Kibbutz understands this as Sukkos Mamash Aslam, as the literal taich in the pasuk suggests that the Yidden lived in Sukkos, small portable huts or booths, as they wandered in the Midbar for 40 years. Eliezer says, Anani HaKavod Hayu. This mitzvah refers to the clouds of glory. Shekifim behem labal yakim shor v'shemesh. And then they covered that enveloped and protect the Yidden from the rain and sun in the most miraculous way throughout the years in the Midbar. Whereas according to Eliezer, the mitzvah sitting in the sukkah commemorates the miraculous event of the Ananei Kavod. The Rashbam in the Chumash explains that according to Rabbi Kiva, the reason Hashem commanded us to sit in the sukkah, especially this time of the year when the cold, rainy season begins, is because it corresponds to the time when all the produce that grew during the summer months was gathered into the homes and warehouses. Now, since one might begin to feel overly secure and confident with his wealth and comfortable in his warm home, Hashem commanded us to leave our homes and dwell in a simple sukkah, thereby reminding us how when the Bnei Yisrael wandered in the vast, uninhabited desert for 40 years, Hashem protected them and took care of their every need. So too, today, we need to remember that all the security and goodness that we have comes only from Him. Hilchas Asiyas Sukkah. Our Masechta begins with Sukkah she'gevoy l'malam esrim ama psula. The Tanna Kama holds that a sukkah which is higher than 20 amas is possible, whereas a Yehuda Machshir, Yehuda holds that it is kosher. The Gemara cites several Amoraim who offer reasons why the Tanna Kama holds that l'malam esrim ama psula. Among them are Rabbah, who explains that the Tanna Kama's reasoning is based on the pasuk l'man yedu dereseichem ki b'sukkos v'shavtis b'nei Yisrael b'yitziosem me'eretz Mitzrayim. That while sitting in the sukkah, a person must not only know the reason why he is sitting in the sukkah, but he must also be able to easily see the schach on the roof of the sukkah. However, l'malam esrim ama l'sholta b'eina. If the sukkah is higher than 20 amos, the schach will be outside of his field of vision. Rabbi gives an additional reason. Mishum the sukkah diris aroi bina. A sukkah must be made as a temporary dwelling place, not as a permanent structure. And if it were built more than 20 amos high, it would need to be built as a permanent structure. And the Mishnah continues, the lowest the walls of a sukkah may be, v'she'in gevoya asar tvachim. A sukkah less than 10 tvachim high is possible. However, with regards to its size, in other words, with its width and length, there's a 3 machlekes between the Beis Shammai and the Beis Hillel and Reb Meir. Both the Beis Shammai and the Beis Hillel agree with the above reason that the sukkah diris aroi bina. That a sukkah must be built as a temporary structure. But according to the Beis Hillel, the minimum shir is vav tvachim al vav tvachim, 6 by 6 tvachim, kishir reisha v'rubai, just large enough for a person to sit in the sukkah. And according to the Beis Shammai, the minimum shir is zayin tvachim al zayin tvachim, 7 by 7 tvachim, large enough for most of a person and his table to fit in the sukkah. However, Meir argues with all of the above and holds that sukkah diris kavabina, that a sukkah must be built as a permanent structure. Therefore, he says sukkah sheim badal al dal psula, that a sukkah that is less than 4 by 4 amas is possible. Here is one of the few places in Shas that we paskin like the Beis Shammai that the minimum size of a sukkah is zayin al zayin by 10 tvachim high. Mitzvah asiyas sukkah. Whether it is actually a mitzvah to build a sukkah is a machlekes among the poskim. However, the Gemara in Daf Tes presents a machlekes between the Beis Shammai and the Beis Hillel whether a sukkah needs to be made lishma or not. The Torah in Parshas Emor writes, "B'chamisha asa yoyim lachedesh hashvi hazeh chag sukkos shivas yomim laHashem." The Beis Shammai hold be'inan sukkah hasuya l'shem chag, that a sukkah needs to be made lishma, for the purpose of the mitzvah l'shem mitzvah sukkah, and the Beis Hillel hold loy be'inan sukkah hasuya l'shem chag. And they use the words in our pasuk to teach she'atzei sukkah asurin kol sheva, that the walls of the sukkah are asar b'ana all 7 days of sukkahs. The Mishnah goes on to teach v'she'en lo sholish tefanas psula, that a sukkah must have at least 3 walls. However, on Daf Vav, we learned that here too there is a machlekes. Turn Rabban, Shtaim kel chasan b'shlishis afil tefach. The Chum hold that while a sukkah needs to have 3 walls, only 2 of the 3 walls must be complete walls of at least 7 tefachim wide, while the 3rd wall needs to be only 1 tefach wide. Shimon Aimer, shalish kel chasan v'revi'is afil tefach. That a sukkah really needs to be made of 4 walls, with 3 complete walls of at least 7 tefachim wide, while the 4th wall can be only 1 tefach wide. Gemara explains that this machlekes is based on whether we say yesh aim lemikra or whether we say yesh aim lemesiris. Yesh aim lemesiris means that we give precedence to the way a word is spelled or written. Yesh aim lemikra means that we give precedence to the way a word is vowelized and read, as follows. Sukkos teishra shivas yamim. Kol ezach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkos, leman yedu deresechim ki b'sukkos hishavti es b'nei Yisrael. If we notice, in these psukim, the word sukkos is written twice without a vav, and can be read sukkas, in other words, in the singular, and once with a vav, which is read sukkos, in the plural. Both the Chacham and Reb Shimon agree that the amount of walls of a sukkah must have is learned out from how many times sukkah is alluded to in these psukim. The Chacham hold yesh aim lemesiris. Therefore, the 2 sukkos written without a vav are considered as singular, and sukkos written with a vav is in the plural, 1 plus 1 plus 2, which gives us a total of 4 sukkahs referred to in these psukim. 1 is used to teach the basic mitzvah sukkah, and the other 3 teach that 3 walls are needed for a sukkah. However, Reb Shimon holds that yeshem lemikra, each time the word is read as sukkos in the plural, it is considered as 2 times. Therefore, Reb Shimon explains that 1 word sukkos teaches the basic mitzvah of sukkahs, and the other 2, which are 4, teach that 4 walls are needed for a sukkah. Either way, there's halacha Moshe Messina that diminishes the last wall that only needs to be 1 tefach. And exactly where and how to place this 1 tefach wall is discussed at length on the Vav and Zay. Amarav mamida keneged hayotze, on its corner, as we see here. However, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi hold yamedenu keneged reish tor. It should be placed at the open corner at an angle. This way, it at least covers parts of the 2 open walls. And Rav Shimon Levi holds, asalei tefach seichik. We should make the wall a bit more than tefach wide. Umamida b'pachas mishleisha tefachim samach l'dayfen, and place it within 3 tefachim of the corner. Chopachas mishleisha samach l'dayfen kalavid dami. Lavid, which is halacha Moshe Messina, allows for a gap or open space of less than 3 tefachim to be considered as if it was closed. Therefore, this 3rd wall is now considered a 4 tefach wall, which is rive of the required minimum of 7 tefachim. The schach. Rashi, right at the beginning of our Masechta, explains that al shem haschach kriya sukkah. It is specifically the schach that constitutes a sukkah. The schach must be placed on the sukkah l'shem tzel, with the intent to provide shade. If it was placed on the sukkah for any other purpose, for instance, a bundle of straw that was placed there to dry out under the hot sun, this straw cannot just be left there and be considered a schach. It would first need to be removed and then placed back on l'shem tzel. The Mishnah Daf Yud Aleph teaches the general rule regarding what material may be used for the schach. Zahaklal, kol davar she'ein mekabel tuma, v'gidulim min haaretz, sachin bay. Only materials that grew from the ground, such as straw, branches, or twigs, ve'ein mechabel karka, and is no longer attached from the ground, may be used for schach. The source for this is taught on Daf Yud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kra. Chag HaSukkos tas l'cha shivas yamim, ba'aspacha, migarncha, mikfecha, b'psailis garim v'yakam b'kaz medaber. Yochanan explains that the pasuk is referring to what is left over after you process your grain, meaning its straw, or what is left over from your grapes, meaning its vine or twigs. In other words, only items that are gedulim and aretz, grow from the ground, ve'ein mechabel karka, and are no longer attached to the ground, ve'ein mekabel tama, and are not susceptible to tamei. Only such items may be used for schach. However, fruits, vegetables, or wood that was fashioned into a kli are possible because they are mekabel tama. However, the Mishnah Daf Yud Gimel teaches that v'kulan kisheris b'tfanis, that any of these materials may be used to build the tfanis, the walls of the sukkah, even those that are possible for the schach. Some other general rules regarding the schach, v'shechamasa meruba mitzilasa psula, which is mentioned in the first Mishnah of our Masechta. The purpose of the schach is to provide ample shade inside the sukkah. Therefore, if the schach was scattered loosely over the top of the sukkah, and the shade it provides is less than the sun shining through, the sukkah is possible. If within the schach there is a strip of open space, 3 tvachim wide, then this effectively splits the sukkah into 2 separate sukkahs. So now, if this was a sukkah with 4 walls, then as long as each side has 7 by 7 tvachim, then what we have here are 2 separate kosher sukkahs with 3 walls each. However, if the sukkah only has 3 walls to begin with, then what we have left is 2 separate sukkahs with only 2 walls each, which is possible. However, if the open ear gap is less than 3 tvachim, the sukkah is considered as 1 with 3 kosher walls on account of lavet. If within the schach there is a strip covered b'davar she'mesachim by with invalid schach, for instance, a board less than 4 tvachim wide, this would not affect the sukkah. One may not sit underneath it, but the sukkah itself is still kosher. However, if the board is more than 4 tvachim wide, then it would effectively split the sukkah into 2 separate sukkahs. And once again, if the sukkah had only 3 walls to begin with, then both sides only have 2 walls now in this puzzle. However, in this case of invalid schach, the sukkah would still be kosher if the 4 tefach wide board was within 4 amas of one of the walls, and that is because of another halacha Moshe Sinai, doifin akuma, a bent wall. The rule of doifin akuma allows us to view a wall as bending at the top and extending all the way past the invalid schach till the valid schach. However, doifin akuma is limited to a horizontal distance of 4 amas, and also one may not sit under that area since it is considered as part of the wall. The schach must be kosher schach as it is being placed on the walls, not that it should still need to be made kosher later while on the walls. 2 examples of tasa b'leim asur are, if a vine which was still attached to the ground was placed on the roof of the sukkah for schach, it is possible, because when it was placed on the sukkah, it was not valid schach since it was still attached to the ground. And even if it was later detached, it will still be possible because it is tasa b'leim asur. What would need to be done is for the vine to be taken off the sukkah, cut off from the ground, and then replaced on the sukkah. In another case of tasa b'leim asur, if a large open space of 7 by 7 tefachim was dug out from a large pile of straw, it may not be used as a sukkah, even though the roof is made of kosher schach material, and this is also because the roof was tasa b'leim asur. Since the straw now used as a roof was there before the 7 by 7 tefachim space was dug out to be used as a sukkah, and it became a roof only by default, meaning it was not originally placed there to provide shade, it is therefore possible. Mitzvahs arba'as hamina. The Torah writes in Parshas Emor, "V'lekachtem lechem b'yom rishon," and you should take for yourself on the first day of Sukkos pre-eitz hadar, the fruit of a beautiful tree, kabis tamarim, branches of date palm tree, v'anaf eitz avos, and the shoots of the plaited tree, v'avrei nachal, and the shoots of a willow tree that grows near a brook. Samachtem l'fnei Hashem l'keichem Shabbos Yom, and it shall rejoice before Hashem for 7 days. The Gemara Daf Lamed Hey explains that the words pre-eitz hadar teach that we're to take an esrog as one of the arba'as hamina. Ask the Gemara, name a pepolin. The Rambam in his Hakdama the Pershim Mishnayos writes that even though it seems that the Gemara is challenging the accepted tradition that the mitzvah pre-eitz hadar is to be done with an esrog, nevertheless he explains that the tradition that we are to use an esrog was never in doubt, since it was a continuous tradition all the way back from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. What the Gemara is asking is, how is this merumaz in the words of pre-eitz hadar? And the Rambam goes on to explain that the reason the Amoram wanted to find a source, or at least a remez from the psukim, is because if we cannot somehow connect the esrog to the pasuk through a remez or by other means, then we would be forced to consider the Messiah of the Arba Minim to be a halacha Moshe Sinai. But yet there was no such Messiah. As he writes, She'af apishim kabbalah b'Moshe eino no oimrim pre-eitz hadahu esrog halacha l'Moshe Sinai. David Amoram were compelled to find its remez in the words of the Torah. The Chum famously explained the words pre-eitz hadar to mean shetam eitzai upiri shaba. That since the word eitz seems superfluous, as it could have just said pri hadar, by adding the word eitz, the Torah is telling us that it is referring to a tree that has the same taste as its fruit, which is the esrog. Another explanation among others cited in the Gemara is Rebbe, who says, Aturki hadar el hadir, that the word hadar is to be read as hadir, as Rashi explains. Pri eitz shadoime iloni ledir shel tzayin. Just like a deer shel tzayin has older and younger sheep living together in the pen at the same time, so too the esrog tree has fully grown esrogim and esrogim which are just beginning to emerge, growing on the same tree at the same time. The esrog. Understanding the structure of an esrog. The tip of an average esrog will have a pitim or dad protruding from its top, which is capped off with a sheshanta. Actually, when the esrog begins to grow, it it is this pitim that appears first, and only later, as it becomes bigger, does the body of the esrog begin to grow under it. The area below the pitim is referred to as the chaitim, the nose. While there are numerous shittas as to where exactly the chaitim begins and ends, the accepted shitta in the Shulchan Aruch is that it refers to the upper part of the esrog, from where the wide part of the esrog begins to narrow and slope up to and including the pitim. When considering the hidur or beauty of an esrog, this is the area that needs to be the cleanest. At the bottom of the esrog is the uketz, its stem, which is the part of the branch that connected the esrog to the tree. Ideally, the uketz should still be attached to the esrog, and also it is considered a hidur for it to be indented into the bottom of the esrog as opposed to it protruding. From the word ulekachtem, we learn that it needs to be lekicha tama, a complete esrog. In other words, it must be a shlema, complete, and if it is missing even a tiny amount, it is a chaser and it is possible. From the word lachem, we learn that it must be shelachem, yours, in order to be yaitze, not stolen or even just borrowed. From the words Bayemerishin and V'smachtem Lefnei Hashem Lekechem Shivas Yamim, we learn that only Lefnei Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash was this mitzvah in effect all 7 days. However, outside the Beis HaMikdash, the Yidden took the Dal Minim only on the first day of Sukkos. However, as the Mishnah Daf Mem Aleph teaches, Mishachar Beis HaMikdash Hiskin Rabbi Yechim Ben Zakkai Shei Lulav Nitel BeMedina Shiva Yamim Zeichel HaMikdash. That after the Churban by Yesheni, Rabbi Yechim Ben Zakkai was Mesaket, that the Arba Minim should be taken all 7 days everywhere, as we do today, as a commemoration of how the mitzvah was observed in the Beis HaMikdash. From the word Hadar, we learn that the esrog, as well as the other Arba Minim, should be mahudar, as beautiful as possible. Contrary to other mitzvahs, where the concept of hidur is learned out from the pasuk of Zekil Vanveyu, which Chazal interpret as hisnoah lafanav b'mitzvahs, that mitzvahs in general should be made beautiful. However, with other mitzvahs, the concept of hidur is external to the mitzvah, and is not possible the mitzvah if it lacks hidur. However, with the arbas aminim, hidur is an integral part of the mitzvah, and therefore, in many instances, a lack of hidur could render any one of the arba aminim to be possible. Mishnah Daf Lamed Daled teaches esrog hayavish possible. Also chazazis al rubai, nitla pitmasai, niklaf, nistak, nikiv, v'chaser kolshu possible. Esrog hakushi possible. V'hayar kakarti, meir machshe, v'bihuda paisel. Esrog hayavish refers to a dried out esrog, where all its internal juices have dried out. And esrog hayavish is possible because it lacks hidur. Also chazazis al rubai. A chazazis is deformity similar to a yelefes by a mitzayra, which looks like a cluster of small blisters and protrude above the skin of the esrog. If the chazazis covers most of the esrog is possible because it is no longer a hadar. If the chazazis covers only a very small area, but 2 or 3 are scattered in different parts of the esrog, it is also possible the mechzikim anumar, because as Rashi explains in Daf Lamed Gimel, it looks like a spotted esrog and therefore lacks hidur. Nitla pit masai. If the pitim was removed or fell off, the esrog is possible because it is now a chaser. However, this is only if the pitim falls off after the esrog is fully grown and picked off the tree. However, if the pitim falls off naturally while still growing and attached to the tree, then the esrog is kosher. One can tell the difference as follows. If the tip fell off after the esrog is no longer attached to the tree, then the tip of the esrog will be relatively flat. But if it fell off while still growing, then it will leave behind an indent in the middle with a bit of a border protruding around it, as we see here. Niklaf, if the skin of the esrog was peeled. Nistak, if the esrog was split or punctured. Nikav, if there is a hole in the esrog where some of the esrog is missing, it is of course possible because it's a chaser. However, if it has a fine thin hole, as when pricked by a needle, where the esrog did not become a chaser and nothing is missing from the esrog, it depends where the hole is and how deep it goes. If the hole is in the chaitim, it is considered lacking hidur and is possible on the first day of Sukkos, but not on the other days. If the hole is lower down in the esrog alongside the chadri hazera, then as long as the hole does not reach the chadri hazera, the esrog is kosher, but if it does reach the chadri hazera, then it is possible. Below the chadri hazera, a nekav passes the esrog only if the hole is mafulish, it goes through the entire width of the esrog. Esrog hakushi pasel, a black esrog is pasel. By Yarka Karti, a very dark green esrog is a machlekes Remeir Machsher Rabbi Yehuda Paisa. Murkav, if an esrog grew on the tree that was a murkav, meaning a branch from another tree was grafted onto the esrog tree, then any esrog that grew from that tree is considered a murkav and is not kosher. And the reason is because a murkav is considered a chaser, since part of that esrog was nourished from the non-esrog branch. An esrog is part of the citrus family of fruit. However, a kosher esrog, especially one that is not a murkab, stands out by numerous unique features. First, the skin or outer surface of an esrog is characterized by its shkiyos ublitos, its bumpy surface, as opposed to the surface of a murkab or other citrus, which are relatively smooth. Second, when cut open, there are two very distinct differences that are immediately noticeable. The outer white flesh of an esrog is very thick and takes up most of the inner part of the kosher esrog, leaving just a relatively small amount of space for the chadrei zera, its pulp and seeds, as opposed to the other citrus, which have a thin flesh, with most of their insides taken up with its pulp. Also, the seeds in the pulp area of the kosher esrog lie in a horizontal position, whereas seeds in all other citrus lie in a vertical position. However, some places can hold that in these days, many of these simonim are not absolute and cannot be relied on. Therefore, only esrogim with reliable traditions and hechsherim should be used. Each of the arba'ah minim can have deficiencies that would render them puzzle for one reason or another, and are listed and expanded throughout the third parak of Lulav Agasa. The pasuk continues, Kapas tamarim, branches of the date palm tree, Banaf eitz aves, and the branch of the braided tree, Barvi nachal, and the branch of a willow tree that grows near a brook. Kapas tamarim refers to the lulav, which is in essence a branch of the date palm tree. When the lulav begins to grow, it protrudes straight out from the top of the tree like a straight rod. The lulav is comprised of a center spine called shedra, with leaves growing out on both sides of its spine. In its early stages of growth, these leaves are tightly pressed against its spine. As it continues to grow, these leaves begin to spread out. Once it is completely grown with its leaves spread out, it hardens to the point where the leaves can no longer be bent back towards its spine. The optimum time to harvest the lulav is right before the leaves begin to spread out. If the leaves do begin to spread out, the Mishnah teaches, Nifredu olav kasher. Yehuda holds that in order for it to be kosher, it must be bound together so that they lie against its shedra, the spine. Once the leaves spread out and harden to the point that they can no longer be tied up against the spine, the lulav is possible. Here too we learn from the word ulkachtem that the lulav as well as the arba'as minim must be complete, a lekichatama. Each leaf of the lulav is really a double leaf, which is connected on one side and is referred to as tiyamis, twins. The Gemara Daf Lamed Beis says, Omer Rabbi Yechanan Rishu ben Levi, Nechel katiyamis, nasa kamisha not latiyamis apostle. Shimon Levi is referring to the center tallest tiyamis growing out of the top of the shadra. If that leaf is split open at its tip or cut off at its tip, the lulav is possible because it is considered either a chaser or lacking hither. A lulav must be at least 4 tefachim tall, 3 tefachim for the shedra, plus 1 more tefach for the leaves above the shedra. Kedei l'naneaba, so that the leaves are flexible and shake when the mitzvah is performed. Even though all arba'ah minim are part of this one mitzvah, nevertheless, the bracha we say over the arba'ah minim is al netilas lulav because the lulav is the tallest and most noticeable of the arba'as minim. And this is also why our Masechta, contrary to the pasuk, begins its discussion of the arba'ah minim with the lulav, as the third parak begins with lulav agazal. Banaf eitz aves, and branches of the braided tree. The word aves means braided, where the leaves of this tree create a braided pattern around its branch. Therefore, the hadis must be masholish, meaning that most of its leaves grow in rows of 3s, completely surrounding and covering the branch. As the Gemara Daf Lamed Beis asks, Heichidami aves, Rabbi Yehuda, v'dekaimi tlasa tarfei bikina. However, if its leaves grow in a haphazard pattern such as trevechad, in a 2+1, 2+1 pattern, it is considered a hadashaita and is possible. Ba'avi nachal, and the branch of a willow tree that grows near a brook. As the Gemara teach on Daf Lamed Daled, Tan Rabbanan, Arve nachal hagadelas ala nachal, prat letzafzafa hagadela bin harim. And later the Brisa asks, Izehu arava ve'ezu tzafzafa, how can we tell the difference between these two types of aravas? The Gemara answers, Arava kana shala adim, v'ala shala mashach upiyah chalak. The arava's branch is reddish, and its leaves are elongated and smooth. Tzafzafa kana shala lavan, v'ala shala agel, upiyah demel. Whereas with the tzafzafa, its branch is whitish, and its leaves are round and rough. The shir for each, the hadis and the arava, is 3 tefachim long. Lulav tzarech eged. The lulav, along with the 3 hadasim and 2 aravas, are to be tied together in one group. However, there's a machlekes whether, if it was not tied together, it is kosher or not. The Gemara Daf Yud Aleph quotes the following brayso, Tanya: lulav bein agud bein she'ena agud kasher. Chacham hold that the lulav does not have to be tied. And Yehuda holds that lulav tzarech eged, that tying the lulav along with the adash and the ravis is an integral part of the mitzvah. If they're not tied together, one was not makam the mitzvah. And therefore he also holds that in ognes lulav el b'minay, only material from these three minim may be used to tie them together. And that is because if another material is used, it would be like adding a fifth min to the mitzvah. The Gemara goes on to explain that the Chacham actually agree that one should tie the lulav, but not because it is an integral part of the mitzvah, but because of the general concept of hisna l'fan of the mitzvahs, which is learned out from the pasuk Zekeli Vandeyu, that any mitzvah that one does should be made beautiful. And therefore the Chacham hold that tying can be done that any string may be used to tie the lulav. Sukkos beveis hamikdash. Mitzvahs arava b'mikdash. Besides the arava, which was part of the mitzvah of the arba minim, there was a separate mitzvah in the Beis Hamikdash to make one hakafa around the mizbech each day with long aravas. As the Mishnah Daf Mem Hey teaches, mitzvahs arava ketzad. Makam hayu lamata miyushlayim v'nikra moitza. Yerdin l'sham, malach misham, marbiya shal arava. They would collect long arava branches from an area called motza. V'zoikvin oisin b'tzidei mizbech, and lean them around the mizbech. V'roshein kfufin al gabei mizbech. These aravas were 11 amas long, so that when they were placed on the side against the sides of the mizbeach, the top 2 amas of the aravas curved over the top of the mizbeach. The makar for this mitzvah is machlekes on Daf Mem Dalet. Abishal holds that this mitzvah is based on the pasuk v'lekachtem lechem b'yom rishon, pri eitz hadar, kabas tamarm, anaf eitz avos, v'arvei nachal. Arvei nachal is written in the plural, indicating that it should be used twice, once with the lulav and once in the Beis Hamikdash. Nechunya holds that it is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And as to the source for placing the aravas around the mizbeach, Amar Bavo says, "Maikra shenema isru chag ba'avosim ad kanas hamizbeach." We're to surround the mizbeach during the chag of Sukkos ba'avosim with branches that reach over the top of the mizbeach. The Mishnah continues, "V'isa hayoyim makifin es mizbeach sheva pam." And on the 7th day of Sukkos, they made 7 akavas before standing the aravas alongside the mizbeach. After the Churban Beis Hamikdash, this mitzvah of arava ended. However, the Nevi'im Achrayim, referring to Chagi, Zachari, Malachi, were mesaken that all of Klal Yisrael should take aravas on the 7th day of Sukkos, called it Hoshana Rabbah as a Zeichel HaMikdash. The Gemara Daf Mem Dal discusses whether this takana is a Yisoid HaNevi'im, in other words, a full-fledged takana, which would mean that a bracha is to be made over it, or maybe it is only a minig Nevi'im and no bracha is to be made. However, the Mishnah then goes on to say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Berika argues with all of the above and says that Charoya shall dekel hoimavin. They would bring fully open and hardened palm branches, and beat them on the floor alongside the mizbeach. And that day was called Yom Chibut Charoyas. Karbanas Hachag. A unique feature of the karbanas that was exclusive to the Yom Tov of Sukkot was the amount of parm that were offered daily as karbanas musafim. On the first day, 13 parm were offered, and from then on they were mismaitim v'holchem. Less and less were offered. On the second day, only 12. On the third day, only 11. And this descending pattern went on until the last day of Sukkot, when only 7 parm were offered, for a total of 70 parm. As Rabbi Eliezer and Daf Nun Hey says, Hani shivim parm keneged mi, keneged shivim umois. 70 parm representing to the 70 nations. However, on Shmini Atzeres, only 1 par was offered. Ufar yechidi lama, keneged umi yechida. And this 1 par represented the Bnei Yisrael, the one single nation. And the Gemara goes on to give a mashal. Mashal HaMelech Basa B'Adam, compare this to a king. Sha'amal Avadav, he said to his servants, Asli Su de Gedayla, make for me a large banquet. On the last day, Amar Lo Oyava, he said to his beloved, Asli Su de Ketana Kadesh Enem Imcha, I want you to make just a small little party for me and you so that we could have pleasure together. Nisach HaMayim B'Chag. Every day throughout the year during the Tamid Shel Shachar, a kohen would go up to the top of the mizbech and pour wine into a safel, a bowl located on the dremes marava's corner of the mizbech. From that bowl, it would flow out through a spout into a nearby hole and run all the way down through the mizbech into the shisen, deep cavity below the mountain. On Sukkot, another kohen would accompany the first kohen and pour water into another nearby safel, which would then also flow out into the hole. This was the mitzvah of Nisach HaMayim. As the Mishnah on Daf Memches says, Nisach HaMayim Ketzad, Sleiche shel Zav machzeke shleisha lugen mayim, hayimamale min hasheloich. They would take a golden pitcher that held 3 lugan of water and fill it with water from a nearby natural spring called Shiloach. Higiu l'shahamayim, taku v'riu v'taku. As they were about to return to the Beis Mikdash through the Shahamayim, they blew from a shofar tekiah, true tekiah. Ola ba'kevesh ufana l'smoiloi shnei safalim shal kesef hayusham kimin shnei chaytmin daken echad me'uva ve'echad dak. They walked up to the top of the Mizbeach to where the 2 safalim were located. The one meant for wine had a wide spout, and the one meant for water had a narrow spout. So that when the 2 Kohanim poured the wine and water into the bowls at the same time, the wine and water would flow out through those spouts onto the Mizbeach and finish flowing at the same time. The wider spout was to allow the thicker wine to flow out at the same speed as the thinner water. However, since the tzaddikim did not acknowledge this mitzvah and even made fun of it, Mishnah goes on to say, those Yidden who were standing in the Azara told the Kohen who was about to pour the water, lift up your hand so that we can all see if you're pouring the water into the bowl properly. Because once a Kohen who turned out to be a Tzeduki poured the water onto his feet, as a protest to this mitzvah. Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. Each night of Sukkos, before they went out to collect the water for the next day's Nisach HaMayim, they would rejoice by singing and dancing along with musical instruments in the Ezras Nashim all night long, till the morning when they went out to the Shilach to collect the water. The Gemara in the 5th parak goes into great detail describing the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. These nightly celebrations were based on the pasuk Usha'avtem mayim besasin mimayne hayeshua. And the Yerushalmi explains that it was called Simchas Beis HaShe'eva shemisham shayivim ruach hakodesh, because those present were able to absorb high levels of ruach hakodesh from this simcha. Shashchina shayir mitech simcha, as the pasuk says, v'hayi kenagin hamanagin v'tiyah lav yad Hashem. Chazal tell us in Daf Nanav that Misha lo ra Simchas Beis HaShe'eva lo ra simcha miyamav. That whoever did not witness the great joy of the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva never really experienced a great simcha their entire life. That we should all be zeicha to see and experience the great simcha with the coming of Mashiach. Thank you for listening, and Atzlacha Rabba.